Welcome back to the Wednesday Project. This is Christina, and I'm glad that you're here. Over the last few episodes, we've been slowly building something together. We started with a moment in Genesis, that first declaration, not good. And it came before sin, before the fall, before any of that. God looked at a human being who was alive and close to him and walking in the garden with him and said, aloneness is not what I designed you for. And then we talked about what it looks like when we shrink ourselves in the name of holiness, when we confuse disappearing with being humble, when we're taught that needing less is the same as being more spiritually mature. And last time, we talked about what it means to be anchored, to have an identity that is rooted, not in what people think of you, not in how relationships are going, not in whether you're being chosen or overlooked, but in who God says you are. That episode felt important to me because I think so many of us have spent years building our sense of self on ground that keeps shifting. And there's something stabilizing about coming back to that anchor. And I want to sit with something today that I think a lot of us feel and don't always have language for. Because if your identity really is anchored, if you really do know who you are and whose you are, then why does rejection still hurt? Why does being left out still land somewhere in your chest? Why does a shift in someone's tone still follow you home at night? Why does distance in a relationship still feel like it's about something bigger than distance? And maybe, even more quietly, why do we sometimes feel like it shouldn't? I think a lot of us carry an internal message that we've never quite said out loud. It sounds something like this. If I were really secure in God, this wouldn't affect me so much. If my faith were stronger, people's opinions wouldn't have this kind of power over me. If I really believed what I say I believe, I'd be past this by now. And so, when rejection does land, when someone pulls away or chooses someone else or makes you feel invisible, there's pain. And then there's something that comes in right behind it. This quiet second voice that asks, what does this say about me? Why can't I just let this go? What is wrong with me that I still feel this? And that second layer, that's often where the real suffering lives. Because now it's not just pain, it's pain plus shame about the pain. I see this in my work as a therapist all the time. People come in not just because they're hurting, but because they're confused about why they're still hurting. They've read the books, they prayed the prayers, they know the theology, and yet the ache is still there. I'm thinking of someone I worked with. I'll call her Anna. She was a woman who, by every outward measure, had built a full life. Her faith was real. Her community was real. Her relationship with God was not performance. It was genuine. And she came to me because a friendship had ended. Not dramatically, quietly. The kind of ending where you realize one day that the calls stopped coming and you're not sure when it happened. And what she said to me and what she kept coming back to wasn't necessarily the loss itself. It was this. I shouldn't still be thinking about this. Something must be wrong with me. She had layered shame on top of grief, and the shame was heavier than the grief. I want to take us somewhere before we go any further clinically. I want to take us to the Psalms, because if there's any collection of writing that refuses to spiritually bypass pain, it's the Psalms. These are songs written by people who knew God deeply, personally, intimately, and who still cried out from places of real anguish. Psalm 22 opens with words that Jesus would later speak from the cross. Yes, this is prophetic. I would also like you to listen to the words themselves. My God, why have you forsaken me? Not, I know you haven't forsaken me, so I'm choosing to be fine. And not, this feeling's probably just my flesh, so I'll push through it. But a full-throated cry of felt abandonment, directed at God, named without apology. And this psalm wasn't quarantined from the rest of Scripture. It wasn't flagged as a sign of weak faith. It was preserved, canonized. It was sung. Or what about Psalm 88, which is one of the only psalms in the entire collection that does not resolve? It doesn't end with praise. It doesn't pivot to trust. It ends in darkness. It says, "Darkness is my closest friend." The Psalms of Lament are not spiritual immaturity. They are a spiritual tradition. They hold something that a lot of Christian culture has quietly lost. The understanding that honest pain is not the opposite of faith. It might actually be an expression of it, because you only cry out to a God you believe is there. And David, the man described as after God's own heart, was not a man who had mastered emotional detachment. He was a man who brought the full weight of his interior world into the presence of God. The longing, the grief, the confusion, the anger, the ache, all of it. There is a theology of feeling woven into the oldest songs of our faith. And somewhere along the line, we lost it. So let me bring in something from the clinical side now. And I want to do this carefully because I don't want this to sound like a lecture. Here is what we know about human beings. You were designed structurally, neurologically, relationally for connection. Your nervous system doesn't just prefer it. It was built around it. From the moment you are born, our bodies are already doing the work of attachment. We are scanning for faces, for warmth, for responsiveness. We are learning, before we have words for any of it, whether the world is a place where connection is available. And that system doesn't stop operating just because you grow up. It doesn't go offline because you became a Christian. It doesn't quiet down because your theology is sound. It keeps doing what it was designed to do, which means when disconnection happens, when there is rejection or distance or rupture, your system responds. Not because something has gone wrong, but because something is working exactly as it was designed to. And here is where I want to bring us back to Genesis 2. That not good, it wasn't a correction. It wasn't God discovering a flaw in his own design. It was a declaration of what he had already built into the human being standing right in front of him. The longing for connection was placed there before the fall, before sin, before brokenness, before anything was wrong, which means your need for people is not the wound. It is part of the blueprint. And when rejection stings, when distance feels significant, when being unseen or overlooked leaves something in you that aches, that is not weakness. That is not immaturity. That is not evidence that something in your faith is broken. That is what it feels like to be human, the way God made human. So, I want to talk about what security actually does, because I think we've been sold a version of it that isn't real. We've been told implicitly and sometimes explicitly that if you are secure in God, you will stop being affected by people, that you will become, in a sense, unaffectable. Rejection won't touch you. Criticism will roll right off of you. Distance in relationship won't even register. And if you're still being affected, well, that must mean your security isn't real yet. I want to say this as clearly as I can. That is not what security is. That's not security. That's numbness. And numbness is not a spiritual virtue. Look at Jesus. In John 11, when Jesus arrives at the tomb of Lazarus, he already knows what he is about to do. He knows he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He has the power. He has the knowledge. He has the plan. And yet, when he sees Mary weeping, when he sees the grief of the people around her, he weeps. The shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. And it is not incidental. Jesus was not insecure. Jesus was not lacking in faith. Jesus was not someone whose identity had come loose at the seams. And he wept. He let the grief of the people he loved land in his body. He didn't explain it away. He didn't rush past it. He did not stand at a safe emotional distance and manage the situation. He entered it. And in Gethsemane, the night before the cross, he tells his disciples, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Not, "I'm trusting the Father, so I'm fine." Not, "I know how this ends, so I'm not worried." He names the weight. He asks to be accompanied. He brings his full human experience into that garden. That is what a secure person looks like. Not someone who has stopped feeling, but someone who can feel and remain. Security doesn't mean you don't feel loss. It means loss doesn't define you. Security doesn't mean rejection doesn't register. It means rejection doesn't get to write your story. You can feel it and stay anchored at the same time. So I want to offer you a reframe. What if the ache of rejection isn't evidence that something is wrong with you? What if it's evidence of your capacity for connection? The same system that lets you love is the one that feels the absence of love. The same heart that is capable of real attachment is the one that registers when attachment is disrupted. You cannot have one without the other, which means your sensitivity might not be your problem. It might actually be part of your design. And the goal, and I want to say this carefully, the goal isn't to become someone who doesn't feel rejection. The goal is to become someone who knows what to do with it when it comes, who can feel the ache without turning it into a verdict, who can notice the pain without letting the pain decide who they are, who can stay present to the feeling and still return to the anchor. That is not the absence of feeling. That is a different relationship with feeling. And that kind of groundedness is not built overnight. It is built slowly in the practice of naming what's true about your pain without being consumed by it, in the practice of bringing it to God the way the psalmist did, honestly, fully, without performance. It is the practice of letting yourself be known, even when being known feels like a risk. I want to leave you with something today that I hope you carry with you. If you are someone who feels rejection deeply, if you are someone who carries the ache of disconnection longer than you think you should, I want you to hear this. That is not a flaw. That is not evidence that your faith is too small. That is not a sign that you have more healing to do before you deserve to be okay. It is evidence that you were made for connection, that the blueprint God wrote into you is still intact. The longing you feel is not the wound. The longing you feel is proof that you are human, fully, completely, exactly as designed. And the work, the slow, patient, often uncomfortable work, is not to stop feeling. It is to learn to feel while staying anchored. To let the grief move through you without letting it define you. To name the ache the way the psalmists named it. Honestly, directly, to a God who can hold it. Your capacity to feel was never the problem. It is part of how you love. It is part of how you are loved. Until next Wednesday, let yourself feel. Stay anchored. You were made for this.